All right, so let's go ahead and get started painting some blueberries. So I'm going to come back over to my layers panel and I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. And I know that this is going to be blueberry, and I'm going to call this blueberry base because it's going to be my base layer for the blueberries. So blueberry base, there we go. And I'm going to go ahead and come down to my corner where my blueberry sketch is, and I'm going to zoom in on that. And I can see here that my brush is way too big, so I'm going to go ahead and bring that down. And what I'm going to do is, normally I would suggest that you use color schemes. For this first set of little drawings, we're not going to use color schemes. We'll just kind of wing it from the color palette here. But normally I, do suggest that color schemes are planned out and used for these drawings. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and just start painting some stuff. So let's see, the very first thing I'm going to have you do is under your brushes, we need to choose a brush that has a varied width, which I already have chosen, but I want to make sure that you're choosing a brush that has a varied width. And what a varied width means is that the brush it starts off thin, it gets thicker, and then it gets thinner towards the end. So like this hard round brush does not have a varied width. And in fact, let me show you what it looks like when it paints. So I'm going to come over to my color palette here, and I'm going to choose a blue of sorts for my blueberries. So somewhere in there, even though I think blueberries are actually purple, but that's okay. Anyway, so if I have the hard round brush chosen, and if I draw really lightly and then I draw a little heavier, it's going to react just like a pencil or a pen would or a paintbrush, where there's a varied width when I apply it to Photoshop. If I'm choosing the hard round brush, it doesn't have any pressure sensitivity. So it doesn't matter if I push light or soft, it's going to have the same thickness. And that's really what the magic of the tablet is that it has pressure sensitivity. If you use, say, a brush that has a varied width with your mouse doesn't have any pressure sensitivity. So there's going to be no reason to even use a brush with a varied width with the mouse. And that's why doing this tutorial without a tablet is completely pointless, because if you're painting with a mouse, first of all, it's not going to look good. But second of all, you don't have pressure sensitivity. That's the whole magic of the tablet. So anyways, I am going to go ahead and go back, and I'm sorry. So I can go back into brushes. I'm going to hit my E key, and I'm just going to erase all this really quick. So anyways, the varied width is the way to go. So for this very beginning, what we're going to do in here, I'm going to have you choose the hard round. The soft round pressure brush is another popular one. Let me just show you what it looks like really quick. Another thing that happens all the time is that you have your eraser chosen when you think you have your paintbrush chosen. So watch that. So if you toggle back and forth between your brush and your eraser all the time, you're going to constantly be doing brush settings for your eraser, thinking that you're doing brush settings for your paintbrush, which is exactly what I just did. So anyways, if I choose soft round here and I go ahead and do some painting, it's okay, but it has these blurred edges and it tends to look pretty crappy for illustration, in my personal opinion. Some artists use it, but I don't really like it. So anyways, for the first part of this, go ahead and choose the hard round pressure size. So I'm going to just go back to my eraser and get rid of this really quick. And then I'm going to make sure I hit B for my brush tool again, and then go back to the hard round pressure size. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started and paint a little bit of these blueberries. So I'm going to go ahead and cover, I'm just going to go through and draw where I know that I want this base blue to go, which is clearly on the body of the blueberries. So one thing that you can do is you can change the smoothing of the pen. So this is probably going to be a really helpful thing, especially if you're brand new to this. A lot of beginners' lines tend to look kind of like you know, like real shaky. So I'll just undo all that. If you turn smoothing on, that helps quite a bit. So let me show you the difference. So I'm going to do kind of a shaky first line without the smoothing on. So here's my shaky line. And then if I turn smoothing up, let's say to like 75%, and I do that again, it slows the brush down and makes me make a smoother line. So I definitely suggest use the smoothing tool, especially in the beginning when you're just starting out and you're feeling like your hands are really shaky. So, all right, so we're just going to simply trace these. So what I want you to do is go through and trace the bodies of these blueberries the best you can. Remember that you can use your rotation tool and then your hand tool to reposition the drawing at any time. You just got to remember to hit your B key again so that you get your brush back. So I went ahead and went around and drew my blueberries, and the first thing you might be tempted to do is use the paint bucket tool to fill the rest of this in. And you can use the paint bucket tool to do that, but there's something to know about the paint bucket tool. So let me actually just shrink this down and fill in these gaps. So if I hit my G key, I'm going to get my paint bucket, and I've got blue selected, so that's all good. But when I hit it, what I'm going to notice right away is that I get this little line. And that's the paint bucket tool filling in, you know, where I've got a complete circle, or so that's the bucket tool filling in where I have a complete circle here, except that it's got some leftover pixels because this is a raster-based program. So the way that I can actually fix this is I can just hit the bucket tool again. So just click down again, and it's going to take care of that line, but it's also going to add just a little bit more width to where we colored on the blueberries already. So now what I want to do is I want to clean these up a little bit because they're not looking totally perfect. And I've gone over in paint in some of these lines. So I am actually going to go back over to layers, and I'm going to take the tracing group and put it up above the blueberries. And since the transparency of the group is down to 42%, I can still see the sketch, but I can also see what's going on with the blue layer here. So if I click on my blueberry base, I'm going to go ahead and hit the eraser tool, and I'm going to go through and clean this up just a little bit. I don't have a good brush. I have my the brush I actually told you guys not to use chosen for my eraser. So I'm going to go back in here and pick the hard round pressure brush for the eraser and get this just a little bit closer. Now these lines do not need to be perfect by any means. So also know that there's smoothing for the eraser as well. So I can go ahead and bring my smoothing up so that my lines are not so shaky when I'm using the eraser. So go ahead and go through and clean up the blueberries around the edge here. Okay, so I've pretty much got my blueberries shaped up. I'm not going to worry too much about these edges because I'm going to go in and use a different brush later on to make some contour lines. The other thing that's important for you to know about this particular tutorial is I am not expecting your drawing of blueberries to look like my drawing of blueberries, because I've been using a digital tablet for a really long time, and my blueberries aren't even going to look that good because I'm not going to spend as much time on them as I normally would for a regular digital illustration, because this tutorial would be way too long. So just know that I'm only expecting to see that you were able to draw something that sort of resembles a blueberry and a strawberry and rocks by the end of this portion of the tutorial, as well as the rest of it. I'm just, you know, turn in what you have. I'll be able to tell that you put in the effort. Don't worry about that. Don't stress out about it. So anyways, I've got my base body for the blueberries here. And so the next basic thing that comes with drawing is that I need to use darker shades of blue and lighter shades of blue or value in order to make these blueberries look a little bit three-dimensional. And that is the next thing that we're going to work on. So I am going to go ahead and shut off, well, let's see. No, I'm not going to shut off the reference layer yet. Actually, the next thing I need to do is make a base for this leaf that comes off the blueberries. So I'm going to do that first. So I'm going to call this layer the leaf base. And I'm going to go ahead and pick a green and trace that in just like I did with the blueberries. So now I have my blue from the blueberries here, so I don't need to have like a color scheme or color palette. I can come back in here and resample this blue at any given time. So I'm just going to leave that and come over here to the greens and choose something that I think looks all right. And so this is kind of a middle of the road green. And so I'm going to go ahead and do my base leaf here. And I've done exactly what I told you I was going to do. I have my eraser chosen as usual. So I'm going to hit the B key so that my brush is back up. And then I'm going to go ahead and trace the shape of this leaf really quick. Okay, so I've got my leaf drawn here, and the next thing that I'm going to do is actually go in and draw my contour lines, and for that I'm going to use a really, really dark blue. And so I do need to add lighter and darker shades of blue and green to make this look a little bit more three-dimensional, but first I'm going to go ahead and add in the contour lines, and then I'm going to, so that will seemingly kind of clean up these edges. I'm not worried about the edges being messy because my contour lines are going to look, you know, a little bit sketched, a little bit hand-drawn, so that they're going to look a little bit, you know, it'll break up the jaggedness of this, of, you know, the way that this outside is colored here. You'll see what I mean in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and name this contours, we'll say, and I'm going to go ahead and use this to do the contours for the leaf. So I'll do a dark blue and a very dark green all on this one layer. Meanwhile, I'm going to go and lock my other layers so I don't accidentally paint on them while I'm doing this. So anyways, I've got contours here. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to get a, like I said, a really, really dark blue and green and make my brush pretty small. And I'm going to come in here and do some sketchy, kind of messy contour lines for these little blueberries here. Okay, so now I have the base layer and the contour layer of my blueberries and leaf ready to go here. I went ahead and just added in these detailed lines here of the inner blueberry and then a little detail of the leaf going down. And you see how these like jagged contour lines that I chose to use kind of covered up the jagginess of the outside of the blueberry. And that's one of those situations where, you know, oh, this is a hand sketched look. It's supposed to look a little messy. It's supposed to look like that. That's what you can say. You can say things like that in the beginning when you're learning to use the tablet. So anyway, okay, so the next thing that I need to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add some darker shades, and that means I'm going to need to turn my flow and my opacity down. So the opacity is like, you're used to that. So if I put it at 50%, it's going to have half opacity when I lay down the paint. The flow is kind of referring to how the paint's coming out of the brush. So I just wanted to go over the differences between the flow and opacity with you guys because I needed to remind myself. It's been a really long time since I've looked it up. So you have your opacity option, which you're used to. You know, if you turn down the opacity, you know that there's some transparency involved. And the flow is a little bit different. So let's go over these. So it looks like the flow allows you to build up ink over and over again, a lot like ink on a piece of paper. The more times you go over something with flow as you're setting, the more ink that's building up. So that means if something is at a really low opacity, say 10%, and you go over it 2 times, the opacity is going to continue to get more opaque until it gets to 100%. So every stroke lays down more. So if you turn the flow off and your opacity is really low, it's not going to build up over time. Opacity is more of a computer generated way of painting. if you painted a canvas at 50%, you couldn't lay more ink down on your canvas. This method can be useful in some cases, in others it's extremely limiting. So they're both really important, but those are the differences between the two. So let's go ahead and just do a little bit of painting to see what that looks like really quick and make sure that we understand the differences visually. So I'm going to go ahead and lock my contours layer. I'm going to make another new layer just to test these out, and then we'll probably bring this layer down and have it be the darker shades of blue and green to make a little dimensionality when it comes to these blueberries. So anyway, I am going to go ahead and look at the differences. I'll try to show you an obvious difference between flow and opacity, and I think we'll do just fine. So I've got the dark green chosen, which is going to work just fine for this. So let's see, if I turn flow completely off and then opacity is down to like 11%, let's say. Okay, so you can see with the opacity low like that, you know, I'm using the brush and it doesn't really build over time. The opacity stays the same. If I turn the flow up to 100% and my opacity is really low, like let's put it at 12, and I paint, it's at first going to be at 12, but then if I paint again, you're going to see that it adds more opacity each time, and that's the flow at work there. So it gives a little bit more natural look to the paint that you're using. You know, hopefully that demonstrates the difference enough for you guys to kind of understand that. But so you can shut the flow off if you're looking to have a transparency without it building up over time. I'm going to go ahead and put the flow at like 40% for what we're going to do here in just a minute. And then I want to lower the opacity down to like 15 or 16%. And then I'm going to go ahead and erase the marks that I just made here. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the blueberries and leaves, and we're going to add a little bit of darker shade here to give a little dimensionality. So anytime you want to give any kind of dimensionality or make it look somewhat 3D, what you're doing is you're pushing the edges that are farthest away from you back by darkening them, and you're bringing the things that are closest to you or things that the light is hitting by making that particular shade of color, or I'm sorry, that that hue of color a little bit lighter. So it's a matter of applying value to create an illusion of three-dimensionality. So anyways, I'm going to call this layer the dark. I'll just call it dark because I know it's going to be dark shades. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut the group off because I don't need the reference layer anymore. And you probably got so used to seeing it here that you thought the blueberries were that light blue this whole time, but it's just because I had the reference group on top of the blueberries, or on top of the blueberry base. So anyways, I'm going to bring this dark down. I want the dark to be in between the base layer of the blueberries and the contour layer here. And so I'm actually going to take this group and drag it all the way down to the bottom so it's out of my way. So I'm going to go to dark here, and I'm going to look at my brushes. I'm going to choose a different brush for this. I want to find something that is a little bit textured and is going to look a little bit hand-drawn. And I actually think that the Crayon Brush is going to work well for this. So I'm going to go ahead and use the Crayon Brush. Now when I bring this brush up, it's got tilt sensitivity. So what you may notice is that, or you should be noticing, is that as you tip your pen for your Wacom tablet, the pen up in the little picture here is tilting as well. And so it truly is acting like a real drawing tool. So anyways, that's working great. And I'm going to go ahead and I want to use this dark blue for the shading, the one that I was just using. And I still have it on my palette here. If you don't have it on your palette anymore, but basically what I guess I'm getting at here is I can just toggle this and I've got my dark blue available to me again. If you don't have it on your palette, you can simply hit the I key and use your eyedropper tool and sample it from the drawing, and you're good to go. So I've got my brush picked out. I just want to check my layers. Everything's locked. I'm on the dark, so that's good. And so what I'm going to do is go in and just do some detailed drawing and add with a low opacity. Let's see, I'm going to bring the opacity down to like, I already set this, but then I just decided to change my brush. So I'm going to bring the opacity down to like, let's say 15 or 16%, somewhere in there, and bring flow down to like 35-ish, let's say. And I'm going to go in and add some details here. So I'm going to add some darkness around the edges of the blueberry, pushing it back in space. And I'm going to add some darkness here on the top where we kind of get this like belly button of the blueberry going on. So I'm going to go ahead and go in and do that. And I'm noticing that the brush isn't really showing up like I thought it would, so you can just go ahead and keep making adjustments. And I also need to shut the smoothing off. For me, you can keep the smoothing on for you if you like. Okay, so I just want to point out that I made a really big mistake, and I'm probably going to keep doing this. I tend to especially do this when I'm doing tutorials, but I have had the eraser tool chosen the entire time. I did it again. So I'm going to choose the paintbrush. I'm going to go in and pick the crayon brush for what I'm doing right now. And I'm just letting you know that that's what you need to watch for. If things are not happening the way you want them to, that's probably what's going on. So that is what just happened to me again. Okay, so what I've got here is I've got some dark value going on, and now I need to go in and add a little bit of light value to make it appear as though, so I'm going to put the most amount of light up here kind of towards the top where the blueberry starts to kind of round a little bit, and then I'm going to add some more light in here. And then I'm going to show you how you can use the blending mode from the layer to make this all look a little bit more natural. So actually, maybe I should show you that first. So let's go ahead and go to layers. And if I look at the dark layer, I'm going to see that my blend mode for this layer is set at normal. And normal is okay, but there's actually a setting that works a little bit better, and that is called multiply. So if I go down to multiply, I'm going to go ahead and choose that. And so what multiply tends to do is, it didn't make too much of a difference there, I guess, but what multiply does is it takes into consideration the colors that are going on underneath the layer. So it's almost like, you know, more like drawing on real paper. And so when I'm drawing on a different layer, it says, oh, okay, there's like a brighter blue under here, and that takes it into account. The other thing that I will say, though, too, with the blending modes is that you can use, oh, maybe overlay is going to look better, actually. Overlay looks pretty good, too, where it's kind of mixing in the underneath layers. But just know that your blending mode can be really, really useful here, depending on what it is that you're trying to do. And so actually overlay is looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. And it kind of depends on like what colors you're mixing too. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and use overlay here for the darker shades. And then I'm going to go ahead and start a new layer, and this is for the light values. So I'm going to call this light. And I'm going to go in and mix some lighter colors in here. Again, I'm not expecting your drawing to look, mine doesn't even really, you know, doesn't look great at all, to be quite honest. So it looks okay when you back it out from a distance. But anyway, so I'm going to go in here and add some light to this blueberry, and then we will be done with this first little drawing. Feel free to, as you go through here, to experiment with these different brushes. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use maybe like one of these flat curve thin brushes and kind of see how that looks. So let me just make sure I'm on the right layer. I am. I'm going to lock my dark layer so that I don't accidentally paint on that. So I've got light chosen, and I don't have a light shade chosen yet, so I'm going to undo that. But, so I'm going to go ahead and toggle my blue back, and then I'm going to go in and choose a lighter version of blue. So if I go in here, so if I just go in here and choose some kind of lighter blue, we won't nitpick too much over what the lighter blue looks like. And I just brush that on here. It's not showing me a lot because of my settings. So let me go ahead and bring that opacity up. That's looking pretty good. What looks like something I could work with for this particular little drawing. So I'm going to undo that. So anyways, I'm going to go in and add some light details here and go ahead and follow along as the absolute best you can. And then we'll go ahead and be done with this little blueberry. Okay, so I'm actually going to go back into my dark layer here, and I'm just going to add a little bit more to this leaf because I think with the blending mode that I used, it sort of drowned out the dark values for the leaf. So I'm going to go ahead and lock my light layer and go back to dark and see what I can do here. Okay, and then so with the light layer, so I'm going to go ahead and unlock the light layer. I'm going to go through my options in terms of blending this and see what is going to kind of look the best. You know, if you get to a point where you get used to these enough, you'll know what you want to set it as before you start painting. And so I'm kind of liking this lighten. Oh, that looks, no, that does look a lot different than normal. So I'm going to go ahead and use this lighten because I like how it kind of purples the lighter values because, again, it's taking into consideration the layers underneath. So I'm going to choose lighten for that. And it's not super great, but they're blueberries and they have a really hand-sketched, like, quick drawing type of look to them, right? So I just want to go ahead and say that I did not realize how long these blueberries were going to take. I had this dream of getting through the strawberries and the rocks too, but I'm not going to do that. I want to move on to the other drawing exercises that I have for you guys. So let's go ahead and do this. We are not going to do the strawberry and the rocks, although I highly encourage you going in and practicing on those. So we're not going to do that right now. We are going to do other types of exercises. So this is what I will have you do. I'm going to have you shut off the visibility of the back group. I'm going to have you take everything that involves the blueberries, unlock them, and we're going to go ahead and group those together. So shift select them and then hit Command G. And let's go ahead and transform the blueberries so that they're a little bit larger. Not too much larger, they'll become really pixelated because we've sized them up so much. So something like that. And what I want you to do is go ahead and save this project because you always want to save your projects. So we'll call this blueberries. So blueberries, PSD, save that to desktop. And then you're going to go ahead and output a JPEG of this as well. So file, save as, blueberries, but we want this in JPEG format. And then go ahead and save that as well to turn in for the tutorial. So again, like I said, I have this crazy, I had it like a tree and a flamingo in there. There's no way we're going to get all those done. So anyways, blueberries, super simple. We're just going to cut it there. It sounds good to me. Hope it sounds good to you too. Congratulations. Make sure you save your JPEG to turn into Canvas, and I'll be talking to you again in the next video. So, all right, bye.